In the last lesson, we showed off this SQL statement here, running on the query engine. As any data analyst will tell you, exploring your dataset with SQL is often one of the first steps that you take to uncover those hidden insights. So what is this query actually doing? Care to take a guess? Here, we're counting the total number of trips taken on a public dataset for San Francisco's bike share trips. Now let's explore this public dataset together in greater detail with a quick demonstration. It's now time to dust off your SQL or structured query language skills as we explore some public datasets inside of Google BigQuery. Let's dive right in. So in this demo, how I got to this public BigQuery dataset, which is what we were looking at before, the San Francisco bike share trips, is from this publicly available dataset, BigQuery public data. Now, if you might not have that inside of your Quick Labs account or your own personal accounts, how you can get those datasets is by clicking Add Data, Explore Public Datasets, choosing one of those, and it brings you right back into the console. So I'm going to show you a couple nifty things that I've picked up inside of BigQuery over the years. So now we have a ton of BigQuery public datasets that you can experiment with. Once you found one you like, you can do a lot just knowing the name of the table. So we're not going to write any SQL yet. So I just got the table name. Notice if it has hyphens in it, so we named the BigQuery project with the BigQuery public data with hyphens, that's when you need those backticks. Now, technically, you only need them around the project name, but that's when you see those backticks, which is that character there, come into play. So if you don't have hyphens anywhere in here, you actually don't need those. That's the first tip for you. Second tip, one of my absolute favorites, if you hold down, at least on this Mac here, it's going to be the Command key or the Windows key. It'll highlight all the data sets in your query. Why is that useful? Because as soon as it's highlighted, you can click on it. So if you have a bunch of different data sets that you just want to explore, or you inherited a query from somebody else, you can quickly get to the schema, the details in the preview of that particular table. So we're going to try to get as far without writing any keystrokes in here. So take a look at the schema. This is San Francisco bike share trips. You've got things like the trip ID, everything we could possibly want. The duration in the seconds, when it started, what stations are, and this just lets your kind of mind wander for some of the cool insights that you could take a look at. Geographic data, we've got start, latitude, longitude, end, latitude, and longitude, maybe some of those cool GIS functions. And let's take a look at how many rows we have. We don't have to do count star or anything like that. We have almost 2 million rows and about 375 megabytes into there. And a best practice, you don't want to do select count star from a table limit 10 when just looking at a preview would suffice. So you saw the schema and the data type. Now you can actually go in here, look at all the total rows and see sample data values. So you can see the station, where they stopped and started, everything. That'll get you a familiarity with it. Now, if you wanted to query the table, you can click on Query Table. It'll ask you, hey, I'm going to overwrite everything in the query editor. Sure, that's fine. And it's going to say, select some columns from our bike share trips. Here's a neat tip. It's one I just figured out recently, and props to the BigQuery team. If I just wanted to see, say, the total number of trips that started from the station name, I'm just clicking on the field names, especially if you have field names that are really long, or if you have, you don't want to type things in like I do in a live demo. Then you can just click on these field names and it'll add them. And it'll even add the commas for you, which is kind of cool. And then what you can do inside of BigQuery is you can format the query. Again, even if you're experienced in SQL, this is still kind of fun to try to do as much as you can without even typing anything into the editor. We're going to run that query. It doesn't really do much for us because it's just going to give the station name. It's still at the granularity level of the individual trip. So what's one of the things that you could do inside of BigQuery? If you're looking at that trip ID, we can say, I want to have an aggregate function, like a count of all trips. Now, it's just counting the rows. You could do count star. Some people like to put count 1 or something like that. For readability, I'm going to keep the count of trip ID just so somebody else inheriting my code can very quickly see what the level of granularity of this table. And we'll call this the number of trips. Now, naturally, immediately, you're going to get an error. If you work with SQL long enough, as soon as you do an aggregation in one field, all the rest of your other fields better be aggregated as well. But if it's just been a late night, you want to just open up the validator, you can see, hey, this references this start station name. Your other person here is aggregated, but this one isn't. then you naturally, what you want to do, you want to make sure that you do the group by. And that's how we can say, all right, well, we're rolling up all the trips into a single value. Let's group those by each of the different stations. Now, if you remember your SQL, what's one of the things that you can do to get the most first? You can do an order by, which is going to be a sort. And you can order by the alias, as we see here. Know that you actually can't filter in a where clause by an alias field because it actually doesn't exist when the query engine goes out and performs that where clause. So keep that in mind. That's where you can use things like temporary tables. So orders by the highest number of trips first. We'll just let it say the top 10 stations or something like that. Let's make sure we'll format this. If you want to be a really in Evan's good favor, you can add a comment at the top. This is like the top 10 stations by volume. And go ahead and run that. And we'll see the most popular stations. And we got the San Francisco Caltrain. I can definitely vouch for this one. As soon as you get off the train, you need to get somewhere in San Francisco. And that's got 72,000 trips. Now, if you wanted to experiment a little bit more, what you can do is you can add in a filter and just say, hey, I'm looking for just those trips for 2018. There's another field. We can go back. Hey, if you honestly, I've already forgotten the field name. I hold down that button, and then I'm going to pop in the start date. Let's take a look at that start date. Start date is a timestamp. So let's see. We can just where the start date is, say after, what did we say, 2018? So we can do 2017, end of 2017. 1231, sure, after all this. You can convert it if you wanted to. Hopefully this will just take automatically. There's a lot of date functions and extractions that you can do, but let's see, I think it was it before, like 20,000 or something like that? 70,000, I think, for the Caltrain. Let's see if the Caltrain is still number one. Ah, look, in the last year, Caltrain is actually dethroned. It's the ferry building, super popular tourist spot if you haven't been to San Francisco yet, and that takes the highest number of trips just for 2018. You know, if you're doing a lot of this aggregation inside of BigQuery and then filtering, it's fun for these types of insights, but an easier way that you can do it a lot of times is by actually just exporting the data or linking it directly from a front-end visualization tool like Data Studio. So you can actually say, oh, I don't want to actually limit the data here. I want to throw all of it at a visualization tool, and then you can just have a filter for the users that actually has the results. If I wanted to store this common query, I could do a couple of different things. I could save the query as my query inside of my project, personally just for me or for all people that can see it, or I can save it as a view. But what I like to do, since I commonly commit all my code to version control, is I actually do a little bit of data definition language in SQL DDL, and that says I want a creation statement inside of the actual code itself. So people, if they wonder, hey, where on earth did you get this top 2018? And actually, it's not just 2018; it's anything after 2017 as well. For people yelling into their screens like, hey, it's not just 2018. I got you. Create or replace table. And we can just give it a table name. We'll just call, we need a data set. Do we even have a data set? I don't think so. We need to have a data set first before we're just dumping things in here. We could call this bike insights or something like that. Data set is just a collection. So now we have an empty data set. There's no tables in there, so we can start populating one. So we have bike insights. So create a replace table in the data set, and we'll just call this top trips 2018 and beyond. Try to keep your table names a little bit more succinct than mine. And then once you've created that, you should automatically see this show up. Boom, there you have it. And now you can actually have that. The query is not going to be reran every single time. Now, you might be asking, what happens if the BigQuery public data source updates after this? That's an excellent point. So how would your table, this just dumped all of this data here. It's going to be static now. So one of the things that you can do is if you're looking to link this out to your dashboard, instead of creating a table, you could simply create a view, which a logical view what that means is every single time, and we'll just call this view since it says, hey, that object already exists. Every single time you can notice the icon changes, and you can actually click into here and you can look. Inside of the table, you can actually preview the data. Inside of the view, that preview is gone. Why is that? Because the view is just an empty object. A view is essentially a logical view in this instance of SQL is just a stored query. So if you're trying to query the view, we can query the view, and then that actually just runs against the query that we had stored a little bit earlier. So it's high-level recap. You've seen data sets. You've seen public data sets. You can explore them at your leisure. Some of the neat tips and tricks that you've seen. If you wanted to actually then go in and edit that view later, you can scroll down, bring that result back into here, look back at that schema, and keep exploring as you see fit. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data analysis. We just did a simple count of trips by the most popular station names. There's also data sets in there for weather, so you can do a fun analysis to see. We have a bike share data set for New York or San Francisco, see where weather affects the riders the most, or how the bike share program is doing as a whole when it comes to seasonality. Is there a lot of more or less ridership in some of the winter months? You can check that all for yourself, but you can do it all with SQL and not have to worry about building any of the infrastructure behind the scenes. All that's managed for you inside of BigQuery. All right, that's a wrap.